Hey folks, Rachel Gingell here. I'm in southeastern Michigan looking at a Moline collection owned by Dave Ritenburgh. He has a handful of tractors that have a military focus, and that's what we're going to show you on this video. So behind us here is a model ZTX. Dave, what is familiar about this tractor to someone that knows Molines versus specific to military?
This tractor was based on a Minneapolis Moline ZT.
Okay.
It was started to be developed in 1940. So if you were to look at the engine and transmission and axle, that's very familiar to people and being common with the ZT. But the parts that are specific to military is it has a different rear hubs. It's got a cab with fenders. It's got the front fender. It's got the grill guard. It has pintle hitches. One of the most interesting features, it has air brakes and an airlift hitch on it.
Did you buy it in this condition?
No, it was, I would say, a basket case, and I was bidding against the scrap iron guy at an auction for it. So,
well, thanks for rescuing it from the scrap yard. That's nice.
It was my pleasure.
So what work did you do on it?
Basically, I went through the transmission. It had some gears that had to be remade because they were very worn. The engine had to be rebuilt. It was just basically a cylinder block. Everything in it had to be cleaned, replaced, remachined. The front axle had to rebuild. All the sheet metal, the hood was taken from the ZT donor tractor that I bought, and the radiator and so forth, but the rest of the sheet metal was all fabricated. The cab was pretty much missing. It's very common with an R cab from a Minneapolis Moline farm tractor that was very limited production, but I bought one of those, and the bottom maybe 10 to 14 inches of the cab was unique, so I had a sheet metal fabricator make the rest of the cab. The door had to be fabricated from scratch because it was different from the R cab door, and all the floor panel, that's different. So a lot of differences.
Okay,
probably about 20% common.
Wow. What do you think its original use was for in the military? What did it do?
So the evidence that I have of what it was done is it was used at the military proving grounds in Maryland. And what they'd have a picture of, they have maybe 50 to 100 anti-aircraft guns, and they show a ZTX pulling the anti-aircraft gun out of a row. And the description is that the ZTX picked up these anti-aircraft guns, and it took them to the top of the hill where they test fired, and then it returned them to the line. I believe they were also used on moving them on and off ships and that kind of thing. So just moving them around in storage yards and that kind of thing.
Okay, so when you were restoring it, how did you figure out how it should be?
Okay, so the great thing about Minneapolis Molines is they last were housed in Charles City, Iowa. That was the last place that Minneapolis Moline marketed and built a tractor. And the museum in Charles City, Iowa has all the blueprints and drawings for many of these tractors. And when I went and did a search, I actually purchased from the museum, these drawings are for sale, about 250 drawings, engineering drawings for this tractor, and all the pieces that I didn't have, I was able to formulate and produce those from the engineering drawings.
Wow, that's
and
remarkable.
Also I had some factory photos of what it looked like, so some things that you couldn't quite tell in the drawings how they're assembly, you can look at some factory photos and figure it out.
I figured you probably want to hear this thing run and drive, so I'm going to start it up for you. This is an NTX. Have you ever seen one before? They're pretty rare. How many do you think were made, Dave?
I believe there's about 850 and we're under military contract.
Okay, so Dave has two of them. This one that's all restored, and this one to our right that is still a work in progress.
Yes.
Tell us about the original use of this machine.
These were contracted primarily by the military for use on air bases and Navy ships. These are built so that they're very heavy and they're four-wheel drive, so they're able to pull big bombers on fairly irregular surfaces. So there's pictures of these pulling B-29, B-24, and B-17 bombers, some of the bigger bombers on airfields. And they were really handy in remote airfields because if you have some dirt and that kind of thing, these could move those aircraft that weighed 40 to 60,000 pounds with ease.
Wow. Tell me about the engine in it.
So this engine is based primarily on a ZT Tractor also, but a ZT Tractor was a much smaller board, and this has been bored out to 206 cubic inches, so it's got a bigger displacement than a farm tractor did. They also, at this point, the farm tractor had a magneto, where this had one of the first distributors, but probably the most unique thing is that it utilizes hydraulic valve lifters, which allows the engines to turn more RPMs and run smoother, and has more horsepower output therefore.
Okay, what transmission does it have?
The transmission is a ZT transmission also. However, this vehicle is capable of speeds in excess of 40 miles an hour. So it does have some different ratios to allow you to shift up to those speeds. So the gears themselves are unique, even though the casting and the shafts are the same. And it also does have a 2-speed transfer case and gearbox between the engine and transmission, which allows you to have a total of 10 speeds, whereas a tractor would only have 5.
Okay. Now, I've heard you call this a Jeep.
Yes.
And use that term. Tell me why you use that term for this vehicle.
So soldiers at Camp Ripley referred to several of the Minneapolis Moline experimental tractors as Jeeps. And it was based on the Popeye character, Eugene the Jeep, that could do so many things and was kind of a utility guy. And the soldiers found that these military vehicles could do a lot of different things. So Minneapolis Moline advertised them as a Jeep. They didn't carry a Jeep name on them, but they advertised them as the Jeep. And at about the same time, or just before Willys started marketing the name Jeep. In fact, I've seen magazine articles from after World War II where Minneapolis Moline and Willys actually had court cases over the name Jeep. Willys won the name Jeep because Minneapolis Moline never used or never built a vehicle similar to this after the war.
Okay. Now, we were talking earlier and you told me about the headlights and the blackout lights.
Yes.
Can you explain that to the viewers?
So if you'll see, now the later Jeeps or NTXs had what we call blackout lights. You can see the 2 blackout marker lights just above the headlights, and then there's a blackout headlight on the left fender. And what those did is they have a very low, narrow focus of a black lens, and the idea of that is these vehicles could travel in a convoy and you could see the vehicle ahead or behind you from the marking, but they couldn't be spotted from the air from aircraft.
Will you show me the switch, how it works?
Yeah, so the headlight switch, you don't want to accidentally turn on the regular headlights and then expose your position to the enemy.
Right.
So what you do is you pull out the switch and the blackout lights come in. Now if you want to actually turn on the normal high beam lights, you actually push in this retainer button beside the switch and then pull out the rest of the way and the headlights will come out. That way you have to be thinking and make a cognitive decision to turn on the headlights instead of the blackout lights.
Sure, it was like a safety feature basically.
Yeah, so you don't
right?
accidentally expose your whole group.
Yeah. This is an earlier model that Dave is still working on restoring,
Yes.
but it differs in a few ways from the later model we were just talking about. So show us the ways that it differs.
Yeah, so the original vehicle, apparently they had some cooling problem. They didn't have enough airflow through the radiator. So as you can see, that one has a larger and more fins on. This has a shorter amount and less fins on the grill. Also, you'll see that the air box here is much smaller, and the other side doesn't have an air box at all. Where the later ones, they added an air box here and an air box there that allowed more flow through the radiator and then down beside the engine. Also, you notice this particular hood doesn't have any fins in it, where the prior model had fins in the side of the hood to allow airflow out the side of the hood also.
Cool. So do you plan to restore this or let somebody else restore it?
I'm trying to decide. I like working on it, but I don't need a lot of other projects, so somebody else may own this one someday.
Cool.
And they can finish restoring it.
Thanks for showing them.
Thank you.